impactful for us as a country, Uganda. And of course, we're seeing for direct foreign investment, I'm seeing here 50 investors yet to set up multi-billion projects in Uganda. That is one of the benefits that we could be actually looking at as a country. Uganda, for those that have been wondering, tufunina muwa, you see? Good things are coming. Good things are really coming for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is quite key. Now, still on top of that, Museveni had a meeting with the United Nations Secretary. That is General Antonio Guterres. Was onto the sidelines, but of course he was recommending him for maintaining the regional peace, most especially with the missions in Somalia. And President Museveni expressed gratitude to the United Nations leadership for embracing Uganda's long-standing proposal, along with those of other African countries, to receive support from the international community and in also handling security matters on the continent. Now, on Uganda's refugee policy still, we see that the president stated that Uganda's actions were deliberate, as most of the refugees hosted are closely linked to the people. Now, the General Secretary also said halfway of the 2030 deadline, the one in line with the SDGs for the Sustainable Development Goals, many G77 members are grappling with an economic hangover from the COVID-19 pandemic. That is crippling dates, a cost of living crisis, and sky-high borrowing, which is crippling that is economies. And now we see that still the COVID-19 pandemic was very vital. It's part of the key aspects that were discussed. The COVID-19 pandemic, crippling dates, and a cost of living crisis and sky-high borrowing costs. Now, he criticized institutions for failing to provide a global safety net for developing countries in distress. Of course, these are the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. And now, in his very own words, the General Secretary said that I have proposed the Sustainable Development Goal stimuli of $500 billion. That is a year in affordable long-term finance for sustainable development and climate action, he explained. And we see that Guterres, that is the General Secretary, United Nations General Secretary, Secretary General, Guterres asked multilateral developments that is to be adequately capitalized and change their business models to leverage far more private finance for developing countries. That is at a reasonable cost. Now, according to the Secretary General of the United States, he said still that the Standard Development Goal stimuli calls for urgent action on unbearable repayment schedules. Now, Guterres still explained that this calls for expansion of contingency financing for countries in need, including that is through the rechanneling of the special drowning rights of the International Monetary Fund. Now, he also supported calls for the reform of the United Nations Security Council to include 2 seats for Africa to deliberate on the global security issues. Actually, Marcy, you get to realize that China getting a seat on the UN Council had an Africa's vote, a big vote from that perspective. And now it's time to see that also the nations in the NAM, the non-alignment movement, the G77 plus China also have this place where critical decisions are actually made. So that calls for massive, extensive, aggressive action, most especially on the Uganda side. But the biggest picture here, as much as we are redefining the foreign policy, it's important to see how Uganda won't conflict interest, making sure that whatever decisions are made are in common interest of the G77 plus China countries, but also Uganda should be a part of that. If you take a look at the National Development Plan 3, we've had National Development Plan 1, 2, and 3. Most of the perspectives have been in line with the infrastructure. And this is something that we see it happening. Of course, there has been arguments about, we don't see the benefits of all this. But one thing that people need to understand is that these conferences, don't be in the country for the to solve all the problems, because now we are crying out all our problems, unemployment and all this. Of course, it's not a guarantee that this conference being here, I'm not saying these won't be sorted out, but these are gradual aspects that will be dealt with over time. It's not something that can actually happen just in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Like I told you, both long term and short term benefits. But the most important aspect of these conferences is, what do you get from there? Because even New York itself, where the UN seats itself, they are in downtown Manhattan. There are potholes in the US, but do delegates ever complain that, hey, potholes? So that is something that we shouldn't really. I understand the propaganda that has been going on. We have potholes. I mean, you can never be ready to host a conference like this. So it's not a guarantee that, feeling too much entitlement. But however, this also called upon still to see that it demonstrated the capacity of government to be in position to develop the infrastructure in the shortest period of time. And now the critics were saying, if government can actually can be able to improve infrastructure in the shortest period of time towards these conferences, why doesn't it operate the same model in other areas? Because it has demonstrated capacity that it can do this.
Well, of course, the capacity, of course, because this was, not on short notice, but of course, it was really necessary, honestly. You cannot have visitors and not prepare, definitely. But of course, I believe, because we saw inconveniences that came about with all this, the money that was diverted, the money that was supposed to be used for, for election of LCs, and of course PDM, some of it was diverted in construction of roads. For now, of course, as a country, we have other priorities. Of course, infrastructure is also, of course, they're taking time. Because I mean, it's going to be a whole renewal of the whole of Uganda, because I mean, it's in their state, trust me. Not only in Kampala, other districts are also facing the same. So let us not be selfish. It's there to stay. I mean, they're going to be constructing roads for, to even 10 years from now. So just the fact, it's just that because we had this, people tend to be very vocal when we have, so that they can expose the dirty linen that we have as a country. But of course, we have other priorities. Yeah, we've been having infrastructure on our list for over the years. It's just that for this, it was just for this event. That is why we had to, to work on time to have this prepared for these delegates.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. Now, for the tourism perspective, we've seen there are some contractors that are local contractors, like I told you earlier on in the morning call, that are going to be taking charge of the tourism roads, talking about roads that are leading to tourism destinations. But also the MICE strategy is working out very interesting. Remember the MICE market, global market is anticipated, is anticipated to reach that is $1,370 billion by 2030. So 6 years from now, how are we positioning ourselves to be a part of this? Rwanda has already positioned itself. Tanzania is positioning itself. So if we can host a summit like the G77 plus China of 80% members constituting 80% of the world's global population, that is quite a significance that we can actually hold other international conferences. We had the IGAD summit here. So these are conferences that are presenting a lifetime opportunity, a lifetime opportunity, most especially bridging the infrastructure gaps. Because if you take a look at the common factor of all the National Development Plan 3, the National Development Plans from 1 up to 3, there is a common perspective that I've been observing, that is infrastructure development. Yeah, so it shows you the infrastructure gaps that need to be really covered, bridged, if we're to experience economic growth and development from that. Now, still on the NAM Summit, part of the key discussions still were in line with the climate change. Now, with the anticipations of getting back to the pre-industrial levels, that is of about 2 degrees Celsius come in the mid 21st century. And but also still we need to understand that despite all this, because Africa emits not even above 5%, less by 3%. Yeah, most especially that way. So
Actually, some actually people were against this, the fact that Uganda is gonna be, is into the oil and all that. They thought, it's gonna be detrimental for the environment. So they're like, no, why? I mean, we are calling for renewable energy, for a shift to clean energy, and Uganda is now setting up for this. I mean, and we're gonna be emitting fumes.
because the biggest question is that what percentage does Uganda's oil,
I don't think
percentage
really.
that we have
Less
vis-a-vis the emission perspective, because we don't even emit 1%.
Yes,
in
it's
Uganda.
less than that.
Yeah, we don't, and there is no guarantee that we mining oil we shall reach 10%. Honestly.
Yeah.
So these are the perspectives that President Yoweri Museveni was actually talking about, most especially to the Western not having, and remember for these year's conferences, leaving no one behind.
Yeah. Well, of course, they also talked about the issue of digital technology, and of course, how the IMF came up and said the artificial intelligence is gonna, have a shift of events. And of course, talking about impacting over millions of jobs all over the world. But of course, the CEO actually of artificial intelligence came up and said, I don't think AI is going to have a huge impact. It's going to actually improve productivity. Yeah. Of work. In terms of research and all that. But however, some of course people have already been affected. This last year, we're talking about the people in the movie industry, the script writers, and how they were affected, and of course they were striking. So definitely, as well as we think AI is going to improve one way or the other, it may affect I'm thinking of those that are going to be affected, because now it's going to increase the unemployment rate that we already have. So definitely, what is the way forward for those that are going to be affected? Should they go back and learn new skills that they can incorporate with this new technology that has come into shape? What do we do as the entire world, because it's going to affect us worldwide, not only in Africa or maybe in the Western continents, but also Africa as well.
Absolutely. Now, of course, still talking about sustainable development among us, the G77 plus China, achieving this will need technology, and there is need to promote science and technology innovation as part of the key discussions that were highlighted here, and through technology transfer, that is of the South to South cooperation, with strengthened partnerships with countries in the North on favorable terms. Now, the stakeholders also re-echoed the concern that the international financial architecture, especially with the Bretton Woods institutions, is quite unfavorable, citing out the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which are not responsive to finance needs of developing countries. Now, in that respect, they reasoned that there is need to reform the global financial institutions, and that is the architecture being put out there. And now there is a call for addressing of issues such as debt management and giving that is a greater voice to the developing countries. Because I shall be heading into the aspect of the debt management as we break down the discussions at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is relating to that. Now, the group has also updated its positions on the most urgent international problems that affect them, such as technology, climate change, South-to-South cooperation, innovation, and others regarding to that. But, Mercy, there is also still an argument here that we've been seeing issues of the member states having concerns at bilateral levels with the trade barriers that are being put in place. But, however, I understand that might seem out like a big issue, but we need to also understand that there are disputes everywhere that even in the European Union itself, there are disputes, trade disputes within. But it's all about coming to a table. You negotiate together, just like President Yoweri Museveni and the Ruto met at the IGAD summit. Of course, part of the key discussions were anticipated, were in line with the oil deal, though still the stakeholders weren't actually sure whether it was actually going to be an oil deal. But we believe with such discussions, the resolutions that are back are definitely heading to that, because if we are reporting ourselves to courts as member states, that doesn't portray a good picture. I was so amazed with Tanzania withdrawing the flight ban issue from Kenya. Of course, that was a bit of a cooling perspective.
One way or the other, one country has to calm down.
But Burundi and Rwanda haven't really put out there, and the Ugandans are spending about $4,000 to export goods of the same kilograms.
But you realize actually when it comes to security purposes, when it comes to security for countries, when such insurgencies happen, actually now Burundi and Rwanda, accusing the other of spearheading the rebels in Rwanda actually being involved in involving itself with the rebels, that does not go away just in the shortest time possible, unless there is a clear understanding and they really get to know that Rwanda was not part of any. But of course, DRC also came up to prove that Rwanda had something to do with the rebels, the M23 rebels. So you can imagine. So if DRC comes out and says something that is in line to kind of defend what Burundi already knows, it's going to be so hard at the end of the day. And of course, the fact that Rwanda and Burundi almost share the same language, the French colonies.
But
yeah, that means they were kind of, this has brought about a huge difference. Yeah, because almost they share the same language, they almost have the same culture norms and the like. So it's going to be hard.
Yeah, the only difference is that when you take a look at Burundi, way back in time, and compare it to Rwanda, they almost have the same income brackets as before the 1990s. But we see, of course, Rwanda through the genocide, Kagame coming into place, and now the incomes of Rwandese compared to Burundi, Rwanda has increased. Why?
They've realized their potential.
Even actually, the potential is there, but also leadership has played a key role, most especially because there isn't as much effective rule of law in Burundi as compared to Rwanda. Most especially when it comes to following the constitution. So that because Burundi has almost had the genocide and attempted coups, unlike Rwanda's case. So that shows you what really starts. Well, exactly 22 minutes past 9, let's take a break. And when I return, we're going to be discussing matters to do with what is happening with the debt crisis, the discussions regarding Africa's debt crisis at the World Economic Forum. And remember, why are we talking about this? It's part of the discussions of the non-alignment movement and the G77 plus China summit. Stick around.
Smart 24, driving business.
Jovia ng'oyolekera ku lugendo luno olw'obulamu, nkuwa ekirabo eky'amaanyi agatazizibwa, amaanyi okulabibwa n'okuwulirwa mu mawanga ag'ewala ennyo, okutuuka buli wamu nga yadde togenzeeyo, ensi yonna ng'ekuli mu ngalo. okutambula mu biseera n'okumanya buli kimu ekirina okumanyibwa. Jovia, kino kye kirabo kyange gy'oli.
Tewali kkomo ku ki ky'osobola okukola ku mukutu nnandameggwa ogwa MTN. Luxury redefined at Seasand Hotel as you indulge in the splendor of elegant living fit for the royalty that you are. Step into comfort, pampering and blissful customer-centric service as you select from our range of comfy, exquisite living quarters furnished to meet with your royal preference. Surrounded by scenic beauty, our tropical setting allows you to escape the glamorous ordeal of city life. Our ambient green gardens will guide you to a place of revitalizing rest. The 3-star restaurant caters to your palate, serving your choice menu ranging from exotic cuisines to local delicacies. Our chefs will serve you full-course meals for a truly out-of-this-world culinary experience. Our fully stocked bar to whet your throat, from renowned global brand whisks, brandies, gins, beers and wines to our locally celebrated beverages, you will not lack for any brewage. It's an all-new experience in the East at Seasand Hotel. So visit today at plot 15 to 19 Spire Road, Ginger, or contact us on +256 751 719 960 and +256 785 354 614 for reservations. Seasand Hotels, luxury redefined.
Smart 24, driving business.
Welcome back, and of course we're just left with a few minutes to wrap up this, and of course Amase Katsime and Andrew Barije here driving you all the way. Well, of course, before we left, we were discussing, and of course we wanted to get into the debt situation in Africa, and of course the fact that most of African countries are in debt, and of course looking at our country, Uganda, we have surpassed the mark. We are 97
trillion
97 trillion
from 85 trillion
Yeah.
to 87.
So you can imagine the kind of inconveniences that we have as a country. Of course, at the end of the day, when we have a budget, we have to spare some to pay up the debts. And of course, over time, they've encouraged people to avoid, avoid public, debts and all that. So we have to find a way of bringing revenue into the country, and that is why we are having investors coming into place. At least we can have revenue and move as a country.
Revenue, foreign exchange is anticipated to increase because we have a lot of foreign currency that is circulating in some kind of way. But away from that, as of 2022, Africa's debt stood at 1.8 trillion. Now, that is a very big increase of about 183%. So because we see the crisis which happened between 2007, 2009, led to quite high interest rates, and with that, we saw the central banks coming in to raise the interest rates to cap down, the rising prices, the rising inflation, and that made borrowing for developing countries quite expensive. The same which we witnessed for just the previous year, financial 2023-2024, where this Federal Reserve Bank was very aggressive increasing the central bank rate to about 10 basis points to keep the inflation constant. And that also was quite vital because America experienced the fastest growth ever of about 5.2% in the previous quarter, because it was all about, because the developed countries are now focusing on how they can stabilize domestic prices. What is happening in China, we see it's a deflation. And Europe is also coming out to be, seems to be weaker as we come to 2024, but it's also looking at aspects of coming down the prices because the pound sterling has actually devaluated quite a huge deal from that perspective. So all these, where does Africa really stand out? We are the ones that face these battles because we are dependent on these nations, most especially the Bretton Woods institutions.
Well, of course, according to the World Bank, as September last year, there was a report that came in that actually 9 African countries were in debt distress. Yeah, and of course, they were unable to, to repay back their debts. And of course, 15 other African countries were at high risk of debt distress, with another 14 at moderate risk. Of course, we saw countries like Algeria, we saw countries grappling with debt, and of course the IMF, and of course the World Bank coming in to finance them. So definitely, Africa has not been doing well, and of course also when it comes to the cost of servicing debt is also differs. When you look at Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, as of 2021, paid 84 billion US dollars, in debt servicing, whereas the Middle East and North Africa paid 45 billion US dollars. So the servicing is different depending on your debt.
But the biggest question here, we see that because so far China has established about 300 projects, across Africa, and it is anticipated to establish more 200 projects in Africa. Now, the biggest question here is most of these dates come with quite huge. If we are to shift to shift the financial architecture of the globe, from IMF, from the World Bank, to some sort of a China-influenced best perspective, how sure are we of fairness when it comes to collecting of this state, when it comes to the terms of the state? Because, for example, like we lost AGOA because of the terms, So, and these are borrowers, these are lenders that have stringent measures from that perspective. How are we keeping at par with them in regards to that? But China recently came up with a debt restructuring of about 40 countries across Africa that had failed to pay their debts. And I think Ethiopia is part of those countries. Somalia was part of those countries. Djibouti, I'm not mistaken, but countries from around the Horn of Africa. Debt restructuring for 40 countries because it reached a point and they can't take it any longer. Now, following the 2007 and the 2009 global crisis, central banks in industrialized countries have generally kept interest rates low, and the countries from the global south, which had mostly been borrowing by luxury from international financial institutions and gained unprecedented access to the financial markets. Now, many developing countries are in desperate need of cash injection in their economies because most developed countries run cash economies.
Yes.
Just, money comes in. They don't have a lot of money to invest in long-term projects for that. Now, we see that the falling commodity prices squeezed foreign currency revenues, which most of these countries needed to service their loans. Yes, the collapse in the prices, and several countries took out new loans to pay their existing debt, creating a debt spiral that is preventing investment in vital infrastructure. Taking a look at health systems and education being quite some major key factors here. Now, the World Bank last year estimated 22 countries at debt risk. Like Marcy had mentioned, the cost of lending, servicing debts is quite also very hectic. And the fact that we also have infrastructure projects that we undertake and they take longer. For example, the flyway, the flyover which was put out there, it was supposed to be accomplished by 2020. But now it's being accomplished as we're having the summits.
Yeah.
Prolonging the cost. We need to understand the cost of prolonging these projects. Because according to the National Development Plan, you realize that they indicate a certain period this project should take. So, and I feel like it time factor is also contributing to indebtedness in developing countries when it comes to accomplishing of project.
Well, of course, here I'm seeing something to do with the fact that when you talk about G77, they're urging leaders to unite against imperialism that has been ongoing. And of course, with IMF and the World Bank having been the oppressive, actually, and of course, unfair to developing countries, and of course maybe Uganda as well. In most cases, actually, if the people that face the very worst of sanctions and all that are developing countries, because at the end of the day you don't have a say. What do you have to say? You're not contributing enough for you to have a voice.
We don't have bargaining power.
Yes, we don't have a bargaining power. So I think that is why in most cases we are oppressed. Because, I mean, we do not have a say at the end of the day.
Yeah, but of course, this time around, we're not going as country Uganda. We're going as chairperson of.
So that could be an advantage for us. Yeah.
Now, of course, taking a look at the private lenders blocking deals is part of the key aspects. As we take a look at 2022, African public debt stood at 1.8 trillion. Like I mentioned, that's an 183% jump from 2010, having grown to around 4 times as fast as economic output, according to the United Nations figures. Now, gathering under the aegis of the G20, that is the Western public creditors and several partners, including China, have been trying to work on debt restructuring for over 40 African countries, like I mentioned on this. And now these debt deals are built on the principle of equality, equal treatment. All of the creditors must participate. But we need to see that the deals for African nations have been tough to conclude, as private lenders are often balking at the terms. Now we see that the private investors, including investment funds and pension funds, have in recent years risen to become top lender for African nations. Now, in 2022, they held a 42% of African foreign public debt, compared to 38% for multilateral institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and 20% was actually held by other nations. Now, of the 20% held of the other nations, China was the biggest lender to Africa alone, holding 11%. Now, the difference, if you notice here, for China and America has been more into social support and other perspectives, but China comes in with, I want to do business with you, Africa. Let me give you these assets that are needed. That's why it explains that constructed thousands of railway lines, hundreds of thousands of roads linking up to, these roads helping to bridge different countries together, and which the West clearly says China is trying to engulf Africa into what we call a debt trap.
Yeah. Actually, that is what the US actually mentioned, something like that. But of course, do we have to acknowledge the fact that the debt relief comes in too late and too little? Do you realize that? By the time it comes, you've already suffocated as a country. And of course, they don't give you enough. They give you what they feel is available for the meantime. But of course, it takes like the measures, the procedures, and all that. It takes long time. So imagine you submitted your application in September. You'll get it the next year.
Yeah, because if we took a look at the payment history, because if you're just there the debt servicing perspective, you know,
Depends on
probably,
your history as well.
yeah, the history of debt servicing. That is key. We need to look at some of these nations' debt servicing perspective, because if you're accumulating debt every other day, yet you don't have, because one of the aspects which the lenders look up to is what is your output? You know, as an economy, how much do you export? But now, for a nation, for some of the nations that are always operating in deficits, definitely the risk keeps on increasing. And Uganda, we've actually been having that challenge,
deficit.
whereby we import raw materials. But thank God to the industrialization campaigns which are undergoing, whereby we need to start manufacturing the raw materials we've actually been importing to reduce on the balance of payment issue. Now, China is often presented as the big bad guy here, but it has understood the importance of giving a bit of air to states in deep trouble, and is now participating in the efforts, even if this is taking some time. This is according to Mathieu Paris, coordinator of the French platform for date and development, which brings together more than two civic groups to push for sustainable debt restructuring.
Yeah, well, of course, due to the debt service payments that were clustered between 2023-2025, which may further increase vulnerabilities and, of course, risks for these debts. These payments may range from United States $23 billion to $69 billion US dollars as of last year, with private creditors accounting for 40% of African debt, and of course, while bilateral creditors making up to 26.6%, and multilateral creditors making up to 35%. Yes, that brings wow, private creditors 40%. It's quite huge.
Quite huge. Now, another country here we'll take a look in, that is Zambia, which I believe should be, during, as the summit undertakes, it should really address this to the G77 plus China. The case of Zambia is a little bit instructive, because after 2 years of tough negotiations, the country in June 2023 reached what was presented an historic debt restructuring deal, but it only concerned about $6.3 billion of its $18.6 billion foreign debt. Now, whilst it only would go into effect if private lenders agreed to take a similar hit, and the United States asset manager, that is BlackRock, or one of the major private holders of Zambian debt, bulk that way. Now, BlackRock blocked the whole negotiations for Zambia, saying economy worries. But I understand what Zambia is going through. But you see, Zambia got a lot of debt.
Yeah.
But the advantage with this state is that it has not yet, the country is not yet experiencing the fruits of this state. Why? Because when you go to Zambia today, it is evident there was infrastructure put in place. You know, it's a huge asset that was set in place, but yet to have the fruits of this 20 years from now. But now they are grappling with the date. Now, now BlackRock is a Western-oriented company, definitely. And this is one of the key aspects that the G77 needs to put out there when it comes to debt restructuring. Now, another perspective here is in line with inflation and poverty, as with high interest rates adding more pain to the already crushing debt. African countries are experiencing dangerous currency fluctuations, and inflation is increasing all the time. This is the Ghanaian economist Charles Abugure. Of course, the daily impact is dramatic, most especially to the poor people, and they're experiencing an explosion in the cost of transport, house, food, while real wages have stagnated. He still added for that. Now, while restructuring the debt, it is important that it shouldn't be done at the detriment of investments in infrastructure, health, and energy to support the development of economies and societies in that regard. So let us see how these discussions really fall in line with the G77 plus China discussions?
Oh, well, of course, you remember the IMF actually recently made out a report saying Tanzania is one of the African countries that have a low debt, that have the lowest debt. Yes, and of course they say it could, open up opportunities for, for foreign direct investment. Because no investor would want to, invest in a country that has a lot of debt. Yeah, so comparing Kenya and Tanzania, actually Kenya is actually on the list, on the top African countries that are in critical debt. I do not know why Uganda survived and survived to be on this list, but of course Egypt comes in number one, and Angola, South Africa, Kenya in East Africa, then Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course Tunisia. Those are the top 10 African countries that have one of the highest debts so far in Africa.
In Africa. And now you mentioned something about debt and foreign direct investment. Of recent, we've been having an issue. Of course, when we were almost getting into the blacklist of money laundering, it was really a huge threat. But after the reports, they revealed that, okay, we are not getting onto that list. But the issue which is now limiting our foreign direct investment, most especially, because part of the discussions of these summits, the non-alignment movement and the G77 plus China, is to strengthen financial markets, and we know that when any country that operates a stable financial markets has what we call offshore investors, investors that are operating, investing money from abroad, but investing it in, for example, an investor in the United States of America invests in the Uganda Securities Stock Exchange market. So recently, 2 weeks back, when we were experiencing the debt burden as most of the offshore investors actually withdrew the money, and they're not coming back. And they're saying that if the country is failing to fulfill its debt mandate, how sure are we that our return on investment will also be paid to us? Because people by nature tend to trust the governments, because they know they will pay, they will borrow. I mean, got through the government bonds and treasury bonds and bills. So we lost quite a couple of them, and that is talking about reputable amount of money that was lost from that perspective. But let's see how the NAM and the G77 plus China summits will be able to offset those deficits, offshore investment deficits in our financial markets. Because when we have integrated financial markets, we shall definitely, have what we aim for. Because if you take a look at the history of development from Amsterdam, where the first stock market was established, coming into London, now we have one in China, Hong Kong, and New York. All these places are strong financial powerhouses. They're strong business perspectives, but the development of these markets is largely attributed to the established financial markets. And these markets were largely influenced by offshore investors. And that brings us to the end of today's discussion on Smart Means Business. Thanks for being part of it. As we take a look, we look forward to the G77 and evaluating its purpose for the country, Uganda. It's a Monday, it's a fresh start of the week, as definitely we're almost winding up the month of January. I would say go be productive for the day, no strategies for business, and ensure profitability. Till tomorrow, good morning.